am Dr. Maria Kempinska and welcome David Pickles, a highly esteemed councillor for the city of Pickering, Ontario, in Canada. He's been in public office for 27 years, since 1997. But firstly, congratulations for being in public office for so long. And clearly you've still got lots of energy. And I'm fascinated by your accomplishments. And you've received the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal and Platinum Jubilee Award, which I would love to find out more about. But firstly, thank you for joining us here. And can you tell me about your background? What led you to become a councillor, and what's made you so successful?
Oh, well, thank you for all the very kind words. It's lovely to chat with you, our friends across the pond, as you would say. So what got me interested? So I've always been interested in history and in politics and political figures. But I think what first got me to run is what I would call end of driveway issues. So my wife and I had a young family, 2 daughters. We're very close to a couple parks. In our opinion, the parks needed a bit of work on them, and we needed more recreational facilities for young families, for young children in the city. And I think that's sort of the impetus that made me put my name in to run. I put it in at the very last minute to find there were 4 other people running for the position, including the brother of the incumbent. But I just got out and knocked on doors and sort of gave my message as, a fellow resident and neighbor who was looking to provide better facilities for families in the local community, and that seemed to resonate with a lot of like-minded people. And I was successful in that election in '97, and then seven more since. So I'm all about end of driveway issues. Are very important. People like to be able to go for a walk. They like the streets to be clean. They like the trees to be trimmed. And they like to know that the city is being made safe and providing a good community to live, work, and play.
Yeah, so in the UK, a councillor, so you have the councillors and MPs, and the councillors are really the unsung heroes. They're the ones that really deal with every day-to-day issues. As you say, the end of the driveway, the roadworks, small things that are not small, because they're the irritants, aren't they? It's like a cut on the finger. If that doesn't heal, that is going to progress into something worse, potentially. So the councillors are your first port of call. However, in the UK, and I don't know how that sort of the structure is, the political structure is in Canada, that you do this as well as your day job. Is that correct? They do that in the UK. They do this as well as something else, maybe part-time, or you get somebody who is more, sort of as well as a job.
Yeah. Oh, I've been on council. I'm in my 27th year, but the first 15 years I was on council, I did have a daytime job. The municipality of Pickering was a little bit smaller then. I was a city councillor. Most of the evenings were in the evening, so residents could attend. But then I ran for regional councillor, which is more responsibility. It was a growing community. It was more work, and they had daytime meetings. So I left my daytime job, and I do the council job full time now.
Yeah, that's an amazing position, because I know a lot of councillors that become embedded in the community and everybody knows them. The danger is, of course, it's like being that sort of that star that people don't want to leave you alone when you're trying to have a cup of tea outside.
If you when we're out to dinner, quite often I know the people who run the restaurant. I know the people in the restaurant. A lot of people come over and talk and give their suggestions or their issues from time to time. I don't mind that so much. My wife and I just had our 35th wedding anniversary,
Wonderful.
and
Congratulations.
like that, we go a little further out of town. So
Oh,
that
do
we,
you? You get to celebrate where you're not going. You have that sort of film star status, celebrity
well,
status.
I wouldn't say that, but you know, people are very friendly, and they come over and they talk about things that are of interest to them, and quite often things are of interest to them or of interest to me. And sometimes they point out things I don't know about. Sometimes they provide ideas I haven't thought of, and sometimes they ask questions that I've been asked, 100,000 times, and I know the answer to. So that's helpful too.
Yeah, and you know what's so interesting about we're going to jump around a little bit, but I hope you don't mind, your psychological attitude to this. You know, you don't mind. You're not saying, oh, you know, they're so irritating. I'm going out for a cup of coffee and everybody stops and talks to me about the pothole at the end of their garden. You know, so you take it in your day-to-day stride, and also your wife, I take it, because she's in business as well, isn't she?
Yeah, so she owns a retail store. I mean, perhaps you would say a shop
Mm-hmm.
uh, in the food business, not too far from Pickering. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people that come up to so when you're a politician like me in public office, people get to know my wife as well, because we're out and go to community events and that. So quite often, a lot of the people that will know me will know her anyway. So we kind of expect that. We come to know that. I don't particularly have a problem with it, but like I say, sometimes if we need to go away for a weekend, we'll head out of town,
You
or
leave
and hopefully.
the area. Right. So tell me about your background. What did your parents do?
My grandparents
And
or
your
my
both.
so my family comes from a family of laborers. My grandfather actually served in the Navy during the Second World War. He worked before that and after that. He worked in a number of different industries and odd jobs. So it was industrial jobs or doing aluminum siding on homes, that sort of thing. My father, most of his career, worked for Coca-Cola.
Oh, really?
Coca-Cola plant, and I worked there a couple summers on delivering on Coke trucks. My mother was a long-time employee of Canada Post, which is the post office. So I'd say, and I worked in restaurants to help put myself through school or for spending money. So a very, blue collar, I would say, sort of family history. When I went to university, when I graduated from university, I worked for the provincial government. You probably saw my bio that I worked in the environmental field for quite some time, and then in Indigenous affairs matters and with the Attorney General. So I worked a lot in legislation and protection of the environment and social justice, I'll say, as a broad category.
Yeah, and it's so interesting that your father was in the Navy.
My grandfather
Your
served in it.
grandfather, is he still alive? Did he?
So passed away in his mid-90s several years ago.
And did he used to tell you stories about the Navy?
So he told me a few about accepting the German surrender in Normandy, the HMS Huron. He told me that they had terrible storms across the North Atlantic when they're going from Newfoundland St. John's, escorting convoys across the Atlantic. Terrible storms. You tie a rope to yourself, so when you got washed along the deck or over the side, you could pull yourself back up onto the ship. And he told me that they had a lot of when they had their downtime or leave, they would be in London, England. And I said, "Oh, what sites did you see in London?" He said, "Mostly bars."
Oh, yeah. That's quite right. So how did your parents?
I've been in London a couple of times, and I would think about when I was walking down some of the streets in the downtown area or around Trafalgar Square, not that my grandfather was probably there 80 years ago,
Exactly.
on the same streets.
I'm sure he was. And of course, how important the Canadian Navy was at that time. I know quite a lot about the war. So my parents are Polish and they both fought with the British in North Africa and then Monte Cassino and came over. So there's a whole story about the war, which I think once you get into it, you just, everybody has a story and everybody's story is so deep and profound. And what sort of impact did they have on your life? Both your grandparents and your parents?
Well, I guess working hard. They
Mm.
worked hard all their lives. My parents worked hard all their lives to help, put me through school.
Mm.
We sort of do that on a carry forward basis. We provided a lot of nurturing and a lot of assistance with my two. I have two daughters. My wife and I have two daughters, and now we have a grandson. We have two grandsons two more grandchildren on the way. And it's nice to see, my parents help me. I help my kids. My kids help my grandchildren, raise them well, teach them of the world, teach them to respect other people and other cultures, and talk about the richness of diversity and the richness of nature and the importance of having vacations and family time and playing at the playgrounds and going on the hikes and visiting the zoo and all those sorts of things. So I think my family instilled a lot of that in me. My grandfather, again, who was in the Navy, him and my grandmother were both big in scuba diving and in protecting the water and species and that. So that would have instilled upon me a great love for the water and beaches and the Caribbean. They were there quite a few times themselves diving. So I would find it funny to live anywhere where I couldn't have a short drive or even ride my bike to a large body of water. I feel a need to be by a big body of water. So we're not far. We're surrounded by Great Lakes here in the Toronto area. So we're not far from Lake Ontario and Lake Erie, and my cottage that my wife and I go to frequently and take the kids with us is not far from Lake Huron, so all the Great Lakes.
Amazing. So how did they feel when you received your medals and your awards? They must have been so proud.
Well, I think it was a great distinction and a show of public service, caring about the community, and the community appreciating that to nominating me, and for the selection committee give me the honor of those medals. I think it was a matter of, you can do a job. I could go to meetings all day and all evening, go to the meetings and do nothing else. But I like to go to community events. I like to drop by, see new businesses or old businesses, talk to them, take photos and put it up on Facebook and say, hey, if you haven't been here, you should come to this. And I was just at the Italian barbecue, and boy, they put on a great time. Here's some volunteer clubs you might want to join. And sometimes when residents call me to tell me about an issue, I say, hey, I can be there in 5 minutes. Are you home right now? I'll be there in 5 minutes. And they go, oh my God, you're actually going to come over to look at my pothole or broken branch? I go, sure, yeah, I'll come over and have a look. I can't do that every time, but you do it sometimes. And I don't know, I think I think I see the medals as a recognition of going a little above and beyond, and it's a joy to do that.
Yeah, so clearly you've got that sort of personality that not only is engaging, you're curious, but also you engage with your community to be able to do that. Do you think that's important as a leader in politics?
I think it's critical. I think I think it takes a few strengths to be a successful representative of the people, but I'm in constant contact with people, very personal touch, and I think in so much as I've had success at it, I think it's because of that.
But also that you recognize, it seems to me, that these seemingly small issues are so important to people. And that
And you
you
know
can
what?
make a difference.
It, and the other part of it is you have to be very honest with people, and you come out and say, "Oh, I understand your problem. It's not something that municipal government or a city official can correct. But if it's a provincial or federal issue, I try to give them the proper contacts to come along. And sometimes you just have to say, you know what, fixing all the parks is very expensive, and we're going to do 2 or 3 parks every year. Probably your park isn't going to get gotten to for a while, unfortunately. Sorry to tell you that, but you know it's on our radar. But it's probably 3 to 5 years, and people they like an honest answer.
Yeah.
If you say I'm going to try and get that done next year, and you walk away and you know you're never going to do it next year, then that's not being upfront. And some people have said, you know what, I'm not happy with the answer, but I appreciate you were honest.
Yeah, because coming back to that point is how do you focus? Here you are, your role as a councillor, you have certain directives, as everybody does in their role, but how do you choose where you focus? At what point do you say this has to be done? Or how do you actually make that choice on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. So we try to, not that you can put a score to everything, but we look at the condition of all roads. We look at the condition of all parks, and we say we can't do them all at the same time. So let's prioritize them. Let's say these are in the 1 to 2 year category. These are in the 3 to 5 year category. So when you do the 1 to 2 year category, then you can move the 3 to 5 category into the 1 to 2 year category. And I think people recognize that that's fair, and they have a reasonable expectation of when things are going to be done, because you only have so much money to go around, and you have to choose priorities. Keeping that in mind, there's always some things that will never be the top priority, and once in a while you have to do those two, or they'll never get done. But I think people appreciate that it's not willy-nilly, if I can use that expression, that there is a considered assessment and process by which to choose which projects come forward in which time frame. And once people sort of understand that, they know where they fit in the things that they like to see, and they understand that that's how it'll come along. It's not willy-nilly. It's not Dave Pickles picking everything, but you know, we speak to the engineers and we speak to the environmental people, and we look at how much something is going to cost, and how many people will benefit from it or won't benefit from it. So there is a conscious process, and I think once people understand that's how we pick priorities, that they better understand where their priority sits.
So do you have a whole team of people? Is it a committee? And do you make the ultimate decision?
Yes, we do make the ultimate decision. We get inputs, we get expert advice, we get financial advice. At the end of the day, I guess the expression is the rubber hits the road, and I, as a councillor, will decide which projects will be undertaken in a given year, and which ones will be postponed to the next year or the 3 to 5 year category. So we ultimately, it is us. We usually respect and consider all the inputs we have from public consultation. There's a lot of public consultation. There's a lot of consultation with our staff and other experts. But at the end of the day, there's not enough money around to do every project, and we have the ultimate decision of which ones go forward and which ones get deferred.
So where does so moving on, because we are going to be talking about health and wellness, both physical, mental, community. Where does that sit on your agenda now?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because at the end of the day, we could say roads are the most important thing, and we will never have enough money to do all the roads. But at the same time, we need parks, and we need recreation centers, and we need trails and artwork. And people, as much as people love to have a smooth road, once you get home on your road, whether it's a smooth road or a bumpy road with a few potholes in it, you know, you want to maybe go to the park with the kids before you have your dinner, and maybe you want to go walk the dog on a trail later and sit on a bench for a second and look at the trees or look at some artwork. So if you always applied the rule that I'm going to do the hard safety things first, like roads, there would never be any money for arts, recreation, and parks. So we have to allocate baskets of money. So we're going to spend this much on roads, and we'll look at the priority. But at the same time, maybe a smaller amount we're going to dedicate to arts, and we've got another basket we're going to dedicate to parks, and there's another one we're going to dedicate to recreation facilities, to make sure that we provide all the elements of a fulsome community.
Yeah.
A lot of people come and say, why are you spending $10,000-$20,000 on artwork instead of filling the potholes? And we say, because that's an important part of the community, and that's what brings tourists. And that's what, if I invite you over to Pickering, I'm probably not going to show you a smooth road, but I'm going to take it up.
Although I'd love to see it. If I was riding your bike, I would definitely like a smooth road.
People need good roads, but they need places to reflect and to take a break from a busy day and enjoy time with a spouse or children, watch them play in the playground. So those are very important elements of the community that can't be left behind, that can't be deferred to later. And I just try to get some of those things done each and every year. So you don't get everything you want, but over 5 years, or over my 27 years, I've got a lot of things accomplished with respect to public areas and trails and parks and artwork and that. So cumulatively, it adds up and it counts every year.
So when I was in Toronto,
yeah,
what I loved about it, and we don't have this in the UK, which I think we should, just in the most unusual spaces and in gaps between buildings, there was a piece of artwork. And it was so, as you say, it's so uplifting. And everybody was noticing it. And as you say, it does lift the spirit. That's what art is meant to do. And it does that. And you've got it so right there. And if I noticed it, it means that lots of people noticed it. And but it's so important, as you said, for people.
You've had a busy day and you've got a lot of things in mind. What am I going to make for dinner? I got to get up early tomorrow. I got a meeting later, blah, blah, blah. And you're walking along the path and you're with your spouse or your dog or something. And then you walk along and you go, all of a sudden, you forget about those things for a second. You go, oh, boy, that tree looks good in that flower. And there's a piece of artwork. Now, if it's a statue of Gordon Lightfoot, who was a popular singer here in Canada, you go, oh, boy, I remember some of his music. And if it's a more contemporary piece of art, I might look at it and go, I don't know what the heck that is, but it's certainly interesting. I wonder what they were thinking.
Exactly. And who is the artist? Yeah.
Puts your problems out of your mind maybe for a little bit and gives you a break.
Yeah, and sometimes I think, as a psychotherapist and psychologist, we need to be distracted because, so that can distract you for the moment, and then you can come back to whatever you're thinking about, mulling over, or what is ruminating within can be just given a little bit of space, and you can come back to it with fresh eyes. But I love that. I'm going to sort of jump a little bit from that, although it's going to be very important, and come back to your resources and so on, because you've drafted the city's code of conduct. That sounds unbelievably interesting.
So we have first municipal codes of conduct. There were problems coming up in every community. Wow. There were not a unified set of rules and guidelines to follow. You know, it's important sometimes to have rules and to follow rules, and to have measures that can come into place if people break the rules. But it was important for us to all understand what our expectations were of each other. I worked very closely with our mayor of the day, Mayor Ryan, and we looked at what was in some other communities, and we spoke with, there's a function here called an integrity commissioner. I'm not sure if you have the same role, but we worked with them. We drafted up one of the first and earliest codes of conduct. It wasn't perfect, and we had to make some amendments along the way. But curiously, then it started popping up in other communities, and people were knocking on our door to look at ours to help them draft theirs. And I think there's been a lot of standardization now across the municipalities we have in Ontario, which is 444 of them. So it was a bit of a catalyst. I think a lot of others have adopted it. And, you know, you mentioned early on that, you know, there's problems in the world and there's people with extremist views and stuff. And so I think it's stood the test of time, and I think it's becoming increasingly important to ensure that people follow the rules, that the rules are appropriate, and there's social justice and equality, and people are held to account if they veer from that.
And can you give us an idea? So are they? And can you give us an idea of a few of the codes of conduct, but also how do they differ from the law?
So, I mean, the law is sort of more you can't go over and stab somebody or hit somebody. But the code of conduct says, well, if you're going to spend city money, it has to be spent in an accountable way. You accept gifts from others that might bias decisions that you make. You can't go out and say terrible and hateful things about individuals or communities or cultures or religions, not only because we don't think that's appropriate, but also because it reflects poorly on your community, and that's not a community belief. So, you know, there's a few examples. It might seem rather obvious that you don't do those things, but I've seen politicians who have done those things, and if there weren't rules in place, then you can't say you didn't follow the rules. I would also suggest that those politicians have not succeeded in being reelected.
Yeah.
Because that's now how a public official ought to conduct themselves and represent the people that voted them into office.
So this is for the officials, the code of conduct.
Yes.
Yeah, fascinating, because as you may have heard, that we've had two cities that have gone bankrupt in the UK. So maybe they could do with a code of conduct. I'm not saying that they did anything that they shouldn't have done, but sometimes if you have a code of conduct, it makes you stop and reflect a little bit. So I always think a code of conduct is very useful, and it just takes it a little bit further and makes you a little bit more accountable and aware of what you're accountable for. When we talk about the area of health and wellness, are you specifically involved in hospitals, mental health facilities, old age, loneliness, the homeless? Does that come under your jurisdiction?
Yeah, the answer is kind of yes and no. We don't build hospitals, and we don't provide acute care, so surgeries and that sort of stuff. It's a provincial responsibility. But we are responsible for health inspectors, for vaccines, for public health measures, for long-term care facilities, for assisting with addictions, homelessness. We do homeless shelters. We do mental health counseling, although there's never enough, and it seems to be a growing issue. So, and we do advocate to higher level of governments on behalf of our communities where we see a need for a new hospital, where we see need for homeless shelters, where we see need on our streets for addictions. And just coming back to a point that we talked about earlier about municipal officials being in charge of the end of driveway and issues and local streets, it's often us as municipal officials that see these issues arise in our own local communities, that we have to bring them to the attention of higher level governments. And we say, look, there's a problem, and it's going to become more and more of a problem if we don't find a way to treat it and have programs and to divert people where they can get assistance. So because we see it first, we can advocate for it and raise it with higher orders of government. So I was the chair of health and social services at our regional council for quite some time, and we initiated a special paramedic crew that would visit downtown areas in some of our communities, or in some cases ravines or under bridges, places where people would congregate where there was addiction or mental health issues. So we would go to them as opposed to waiting for them to come to us. And the hope was that you could point people to where they could receive assistance, or perhaps even provide assistance there on the street, whereas a lot of people might be wary to appear at the hospital or to appear at other medical facilities until it's too late and they have to be rushed there in an ambulance. So it was a bit of an outreach program, but it's worked very well. And people are on the streets sometimes for a lot of different issues. Sometimes it's problems at home. Sometimes it's mental health issues. Sometimes it's addiction issues, and sometimes it's all of those things mixed together. So we try to outreach to them. So I think that that's something that sticks in my mind. It was a very helpful program, and I kind of hope at the end of the day that it saved lives and that it put people on a more healthy path.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm really interested in you saying that, because my belief is when people are in crises, which I think a lot of the homeless are, and then they become embedded and entrenched, they create their own communities. They need to have people to come to them because they're not going to reach out. People in crisis don't reach out. And yet a lot of politicians, and I'm not saying they're not well-meaning or well-intentioned, it happens over here, but they never talk to people who are in that field. So they don't really fully understand. But what you're doing is you're being that bridge between the mental health practitioners and the politicians who can make the bigger decisions. And I love the fact that you do a reach out program.
And to tell the truth, I mean, before I became an elected official, it's not a world I encountered much, if any at all. And as part of our design of programs, and even this paramedic program, we had presentations from people who were either homeless or had been homeless. And I'll tell you, it was an eye-opener. There were things there that never occurred to me. People are, some young people are kicked out of the house for various reasons, and they don't have a social insurance number, and they don't have a phone, and they don't have anything else. So, part of what our outreach would do was help people get a social insurance number, help people get a driver's license, have resource available where someone could have a phone and a place to recharge the phone, a place to go at night when it's cold, because it gets pretty cold here in Canada. So
Yeah.
a place to go when it's extremely hot. We have times where it was just 39 degrees here the other day, believe it or not. So, as I said, I had great parents and great grandparents. They're not all great.
No,
and
I know.
sometimes kids have a lot of difficulties, and it wasn't a world I was really familiar with. So it was a real eye opener to me.
But that's remarkable that you responded, and that is a gift that you've got, clearly, as a human being. You've got that very humanitarian approach to the world.
Well, and my colleagues. I mean, we make decisions as council and with professional staff, and they, we all work together to try and find the right solutions.
Yeah,
and it can't solve all the problems, but we try.
Yeah, and then how do they link with the medical profession? How do you do that? If they're paramedics, because we don't have that here, it's such a great idea. I'm so pleased we're doing this interview, because it's one of those ideas that actually there's a number of very caring paramedics that have the basic knowledge to look after somebody physically, but also they can do the outreach that can deal with somebody in distress, in crisis, immediately physically, but also mentally, and with the more practical help that they need.
Yeah. Well, our crews assess the sometimes complex needs of some of these folks, and sometimes a paramedic doesn't visit somebody and solve all the problems. Sometimes it's an ongoing process. Sometimes these people have a mistrust of authority or adults, and then they're afraid of people. So our folks go, they start to build a relationship, and then they say, hey, by the way, we can help you get your social insurance number. That'd be helpful. Here's some avenues for healthier eating. We have some shelter, but sometimes it takes several visits or many visits to rebuild the trust with some of these individuals and get them on the right path. And not every story is a success story.
No, of course not. Because
that makes it worthwhile.
Yeah, and what you've said though, David, is so powerful, that this initiative has been, you've not only thought about it, but put it into practice as a community. So the value of a community, your own personal approach to a community. Tell me about that. You've got a very warm family. You work together. Your wife is very inclusive, and your children. What is your psychological value to a community?
I guess a community to me is more than people coming home from work, going into the driveways, going to their house, having dinner, watching TV, waking up the next morning, going back to work. We're very fortunate that we have a community where you can go to the park, you can visit with your neighbors, you can chat. We have a lot of people who do volunteer work, whether it's the food bank, whether it's ravine cleanups, organized sports. My wife and I actually just joined, it's called the Probus Club. I don't know if you have them over there too, but it's for people over 55 and are retired or close to retiring. But it's a social venue. They organize trips. Coincidentally, we had a presenter come to our Probus meeting the other day, and it was a woman who talked about prisoner camps here in Canada, of which there was many of them, and one not too far from here, that took German prisoners during the war because they wanted them to be further from Germany than in Britain, because it was harder to get back to Germany from Canada than it was from Britain. And, it's a chance for people to get together. We hear a speaker, we talk with them afterwards, we have a coffee. Of course, because I'm there, people tell me about this park or that park, and they're happy with this and they're unhappy with that. But it's about going to the Italian social club barbecue. You like to, you mentioned earlier on issues of being lonely. So if you have a couple that's been married many years and one of them passes away
Mm,
and they
mm,
haven't been involved with the community, then they're on their own. They're lonely and they're watching
mm.
the soaps on TV or something like this. But clubs like Probus or a seniors club or lawn bowling club or the knitting club, it gets people out in the community with other people. They're not lonely. Their mental health is better. They're contributing to the community, and the community benefits from that. So I'm just amazed sometimes at how many people volunteer their time and how many clubs people belong to. A lot of the seniors here, they belong to golf clubs, they belong to pickleball clubs, they travel with other seniors, they help out at the food bank. It's just amazing how interactive and busy a lot of people are in the community. It's wonderful to see, and I like to go out and celebrate those things. And I've been known to like to drop by at the odd barbecue and the odd pub night too. So,
Oh, very nice. And what about your bike? What sort of
oh,
bike do you have?
what kind of bike?
Yes.
So I have a mountain bike that I take on some of the more rugged trails, and then I have a bike that's a bit of a hybrid. So I'm probably a few kilometers from the lake, but I love to ride from my house along through some of the ravines, some of the walkways and trails we have, and wander myself down to the beach. We have a lovely couple beaches here in Pickering, and go down, sit by the water a bit, and take a few pictures and ride back. I post the pictures on Facebook, and I say a lovely day at the beach or this park, and I get many people saying I've lived in Pickering for 5 years, or I'm a newcomer to Pickering. Hey, thanks for letting me know about that location. I think
Lovely.
that's great. And then sometimes I even bump into them later and they say, hey, I saw your Facebook picture, so I came down here to the beach. Nice to meet you. I recognize the bike.
So you're an influencer as well. How cool. I want to talk about COVID, but not specifically what happened, because everybody was, sort of in shock. But crises and having to deal with the crises. How did you, because you were very you were in the thick of it. How did you as a community cope with that? And how did you as a leader cope?
So there was a bit of a glitch there in the video. Did you refer to COVID?
Yes. How,
Oh,
not to talk about that specifically, but how did you as a community cope with the crises? And how did you and your team cope? And how did you as a leader cope?
yeah. So that was interesting. I'm thinking of two things. One, as a city that provides services to the public, it was very disruptive to us to have to close our offices, to close recreation centers, even rope off playgrounds at parks. It was very, very hard on the public and individuals because now they're told to stay at home or maybe go outside but don't see anybody. And a lot of the normal places they would go, recreation centers, the library, and whatever, was closed. But and even sort of doing business. But I was very pleased that the city came up with interactive ways and video ways and using electronic documents and all these platforms like Zoom that we'd never heard before. Working from home wasn't a thing. I found the city to be very reactive in finding ways to keep the place running, to keep people in touch with each other, to provide library services, to provide recreational suggestions. So I found that, and to do business by, and some of the things that we implement we're still using, as far as Zoom meetings and submitting electronic documents and going virtual and a lot of stuff. The city can operate much more efficiently now in that way, as opposed to tell people to come in and bring a big map or a drawing on paper and look at it at the desk. So I found the city to be very resilient, particularly as time went on. It didn't last a week, it didn't last 2 weeks, it lasted a long time. So we found different ways of doing business, some ways of doing business and providing services that were better and are still in place and being used. I think as an individual, and probably like lots of other individuals, I'm used to being in the community and interacting with people. So staying at home and only seeing people on the phone was a real struggle. I'm used to, when I'm at City Hall and doing my job, I go talk to the engineer, I go talk to the finance person, I go talk to the city clerk about things, and all of a sudden you don't see people anymore, and you know you can sit around in your pajamas all day or put on a shirt and leave your pajama bottoms on because you're on Zoom. Personal contact, you realize, is very, very important. And I saw a lot of my friends suffer, and they weren't doing well, and they weren't coping well, and they missed a lot of activities. And I think, particularly for younger generations, for a while, that's all they knew was doing school virtually or doing activities virtually. They never realized that they were missing something. So I think a lot of people are, particularly some younger people, missed that social interaction that was very important at a certain age, and it's still impacted by it.
And are you still coping with the after effect of that, the residue of that?
So I would say some people, I think, are still struggling. Here, a lot of people have, lack of trust in governments, lack in trust of vaccines, don't interact in a way that developmentally you would have had you had personal interaction at younger ages. So I think there's still people who struggle. I think from a municipal service perspective, I think people understood now, because of that, understand how important it is to have personal interaction, how important it is to belong to community organizations and events, whether they're sports or seniors or volunteerism. And I think one benefit that maybe came out of that is that, again, the city found better, more efficient ways of doing business and serving the public because of COVID, and found some improvements that remain in place. And
was there something you learned about yourself that surprised you about being a leader at a time of exceptional crises?
I think it's hard to be a leader if you're sitting by yourself in your dining room, taking all the meetings on a phone and emails. You have to get the pulse of the community by being in the community. You have to go up and down the street. You have to talk to people. You have to go to the barbecue and have people speak with you about what visions they have for the community, or what issues they have, or what things they like, while you're having a hamburger or a beer or something, because you're not going to have that same interaction when you're in an email or talking to somebody on the phone. You really got to be amongst people, and 3 or 4 people who give you different views or contradict each other. That's helpful. That's a discussion. That's how you make decisions. So that was, you came out of that going, wow, the world works a lot better when people are getting together than it does when people are kept apart.
There's so much to talk to you about, but we have to finish. And
okay.
My last question for you for the moment is, if you were going to build your utopia for a community, you had all the resources you need, but you could start from scratch. What is your ideal community?
So in North America and in Toronto and where I live in Pickering, things are more spread out because density isn't as great, and everybody gets places by car. And our cities tend to be designed around cars and roads. And when I was in London, there's a lot of sites I'm interested in London, from St. John's Wood to the Embankment and stuff. But I could get everywhere I wanted to go by walking or jumping on the tube, tapping my credit card, and when I get on and tapping again when I get off, and I could get it. I could get anywhere. I think as we design cities, we have to design them more walkable, um, and design from the perspective that it's not a place to drive your car into, sleep, and then drive wherever you're going the next day, but an actual fulsome place to live, work, and play. So I ought to be, ideally, I could walk to work, carry my briefcase, or take a short bus ride. I could take my kid to school. I could walk in the park. I could visit my doctor. And I don't have to hop in the car and drive everywhere and spend a lot of my time on the road. And I think we have to design communities that are less suburban and spread out and more livable, where you can sort of live, work, and play and do all that without spending a lot of time to get there back and forth, and to have the services readily available, whether it's medical, whether it's supportive, or recreational.
Mm.
It's nice to have a lot of options in close proximity and not waste your time getting from place to place.
So would you have localized clinics and everything like that, so much more in a space that you have access to, rather than the big hospitals that everybody, you were talking about, the homeless? And
so I think that's very important. I think if I'm not feeling well, I'm reluctant to want to go to the hospital. I know they're busy. I know I'm probably going to have to wait there a while. If I could walk down the street and not spend a lot of time waiting and see somebody quickly, I'm probably more likely to go get the service and support. I think that's particularly helpful in cases of mental health. Mental health resources are needed sometimes critically. And to call up and get an answer, well, we'll book you an appointment 2 months from now. It's not there when you need it, and maybe you won't need it when your appointment comes up. Maybe you don't make the appointment. Maybe you just suffer in silence and you don't do it. So I think, and I worked in part of my elected role, I was in the public health field, and I was in health and social services. And again, going back to people who need shelter and people who need mental health counseling, if it's readily available, if it's close, if it's something if it's an institution they trust because they're local and they're small, they're more likely to get the help they need. If you have to jump in a car and drive to the big hospital way downtown, and you have to book it in advance, less likely it's going to happen. It's less likely that you're going to get it in a timely fashion.
And what about the other aspects of the community? What else would you build there? You've already talked about parks.
Yeah. You know, I think just green spaces. Everybody loves to walk along a boulevard that has trees on either side. And if you're older, maybe a park bench to stop on and to take a breather and to sip on your bottle of water. If you have a roadway that has a concrete median and no trees or maybe weeds growing there, and there's no shade and there's no bench, it's not a nice walk. If you can walk there under the shade of a tree, sit on the bench and look at a piece of artwork, then that's a pleasant walk. It's not a horrendous walk. So I think that has to be kept in mind in designing cities.
And I think what you've touched on is the importance of the walk, of your own health and looking after yourself. How do you do that? What is your routine? You cycle clearly, so you're quite healthy.
One of the funniest things, and I remember telling a new councillor this, we have an underground parking spot at City Hall. I rarely park in it. So people always say, "Oh, you weren't in the office yesterday. I didn't see your car." I go, "Well, why would I go into the underground parking garage and park my car there on such a nice day?" I park 3 blocks from my office, and I walk through. We have an esplanade, a nice park. There's a gazebo there. There's flower gardens, and there's a sort of stone path. And I said, I park my car and I walk the 3 blocks into the office, because that might be my break for the day. That might be my pleasantest part of the day on a bad day.
Yes, quite.
And I have a look at the gardens. I see what flowers. I like to garden myself around home. I find it very relaxing. And I probably stop and talk to 4 or 5 people along the way each and every day. And so before I get into the office, I've run into a couple of people who've said, Dave, we should do this, we should do that. I don't like this, I don't like that. I've already got some input from the day and enjoyed a nice walk and reflected on some amenities we have in our park. And I go in with a brighter disposition than parking my car in the underground garage and taking the elevator out. And so some people think I'm not at City Hall because the car's not there. The car is parked out on the street and I had a nice walk. Now, sometimes I regret it if it's pouring rain on the way back, but that's another.
Right. So you'll have to get a local umbrella. You'll have to get your own branding. The Pickles umbrella. David, I must say, I am not surprised you've been re-elected so many times.
Thank you for those kind words.
And because I know lots of councillors locally, but I also know how much work it takes, and it is the nitty-gritty on which the foundations of all communities lay. So thank you for everything you do. Shame you're not in England.
We have the federal and provincial governments have all the money and the municipalities have all the problems.
Yes, quite. But you deal with them, which is the most effective way. You are the superhero. So we'll get you a cloak and an umbrella.
Well, if you're coming over to visit your relatives in London, Ontario, be sure to let me know, because
I will.
I'm in London to visit my parents from time to time, and it's only a 2-hour drive from Pickering, and love to show you around if you can make it.
That would be amazing. I would totally look forward to that. So I'm going to log off from the recording, but stay on, please.
Oh, okay.
So thank you so much, David Pickles, and just a tremendous interview. Thank you.
Oh, good. It was fun.